I thank everyone for being here today. It's not too often that we get to hear the perspective of young emerging lawyers of India, people who are witnessing law in India as India reaches new heights. So let me begin with Avishkar. Avishkar, this is going to have to be a rapid fire with everyone. I'm going to begin by asking you, since we're talking about judicial judgments and how they shape India. Don't worry about the mic. Once you speak, we'll be able to hear you. So I just want to begin by asking you, if you could perhaps give us an example of a judicial order that a lot of people may have forgotten about, but it's actually changed our day-to-day lives, because a lot of times we don't realize how is it that the judiciary ends up impacting our day-to-day life. I don't think we realize that, because it's only the larger judgments. You know, it would be a judgment on 377 or 370 or Ayodhya Ram Mandir that gets the attention of the viewer and the audience. But there is so much that the judiciary and the legal fraternity does which actually impacts our day-to-day life. So I'm going to begin this conversation. I'm going to ask everybody the same question, but I'll begin with Avishkar.
Thank you for your question, Devika. So the Supreme Court, apart from being the conscience keeper of the Constitution and all sorts of legal principles in the country, has a major role in shaping policy and sort of driving the status quo in a positive direction. And I feel that it's not one judgment. I mean, I have been part of several judgments which have shaped policy, but I think that there are every day there are numerous judgments which are coming out, be it from triple talaq, or whether you talk about the BS transition of vehicles from BS3 to BS6, whether you speak about there are new, in every facet of life you will find a judgment. For example, in matrimonial life you see the judgments of dissolution of marriage under Article 142. When we speak of Jallikattu, the practice of bullfighting in Tamil Nadu, we see judgments where it was recognized as a legal practice under the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals Act. So naming one would be slightly difficult in my opinion, but I think the way in which the judges fill in the gaps of where there is no legislation or where there is a lack of policy. It's the judiciary which actually fills in by creating a judicial legislation, so to speak. And I have seen in my personal career, which has spanned about 12 or 13 years, I have seen judgments on the BS3 to BS6 transition. I have seen judgments of the call drop, where the cellular operators that transform the telecom space. I've been part of the coal cases where the coal cancellation of the coal blocks was cancelled. So every judgment of the Supreme Court and even the High Court in each state has huge ramifications across the board. So I mean, it would be an understatement to say that the top court or the judiciary plays a less influential role in shaping policy.
Okay, Nikhil, same question to you. If you can, perhaps explain that also with an example.
Thank you for your question, Devika. So like Avishkar said, I agree that in almost every sphere of life, you can name the sphere of life and there'll be 5 Supreme Court judgments on it, regulating it or restricting it or otherwise. I think we tend to, well, maybe not forget, but take for granted many of the constitutional judgments of the Supreme Court from the first 2 decades of its existence. Judgments like Golaknath's case, right, where the seed of the idea that what we must adhere to is due process and not really procedure established by law, which in layman terms means that just because the parliament has passed a law, you can't take away people's fundamental rights on that basis.
Right.
The law has to pass the test of the fundamental rights, and that has shaped the way for many legislations to be struck down, which violate fundamental rights, and has had an impact on the daily lives of and life and liberty of hundreds and millions of people in this country. The other things, like for example, there are many judgments that affect the daily lives and the local issues faced by people. Right. For example, we living in Delhi, Delhi enjoys a slightly different situation constitutionally because it's a half a state and half a union territory. So recently the Supreme Court gave a judgment on what all things come under the state, yes, under the and which come under the union. For example, services. The issue of services was fought long and hard, and finally the court held that many of those would be exercised by the center. Similarly, in Delhi, I think as Avishkar also referred to, and not just in Delhi, around the country, Supreme Court judgments dealing with the environment are extremely important. Yes. Because there's always, as you know, there's always this tussle between development and environment. And that's a thin line that the government always has to tread. And more often than not, the balance is in favor of development. And, because that's what people want. People, as they say, you can't eat the environment. Yes. But neither can you eat money. So that's the line that they have to tread. And in many cases, such as shifting of factories outside Delhi, in the MC Mehta case, CNG buses, as Avishkar said, there have been many important judgments that the Supreme Court has passed. Okay. Janvi, I just want to understand from you, since your colleagues have already given a few examples, as a young lawyer in a very changing India, where we've seen, of course, several changes in the past decade or so taking place, do you feel that as a lawyer, you're being able to impact society in the way you thought when you actually took up law as a subject?
Thanks, Devika. This is what my seniors told me. They're like, whenever a young lawyer joins the profession, they feel they can bring about a lot of change. And, as they move on in the years, they realize that they have to pick their battles, right? But I do truly believe that we are all officers of the court. And we all have our opinions and what changes we would like to see. And yes, I think if we are smart enough and we work hard enough, we can bring about the change that we want to see. I do believe that. Okay, Varun, same question to you. Do you really feel that you're being able to impact society perhaps the way you wanted to? Are you being able to see the changes that you wish to see when you took up law as a profession?
Thank you, Devika. First of all, thank you for having me over. A very good afternoon to everyone here. Yes, you're right. See, when you start off as a young lawyer, you're very aspirational and you feel that, yes, there's a lot you can do. I would say that personally what I believe in is that a change, even if it's a small change, it's impactful. Even if I can bring about a positive change or a positive impact, even in one person's life or even in a family's life, I personally believe that that's a change, that there's a positive change that I'm making. So I really don't have to be a part of landmark judgments. I really don't have to be a part of these big cases which are affecting thousands and lakhs of people. But yes, at the same time, every day I go to court, every day I get an order, or every day I'm trying to help people, I feel if I'm changing even one person, I think that impact is happening. So I feel, yes, the change happens, and even the impact is positive.
Okay, Avishkar, coming back to you, I'd just like to understand from you, how do you feel legal judgments are then shaping the future of India? We've seen in the past how they've shaped, how we've shaped the future of, how they've changed the way India were to proceed. We've had a lot of examples in history where the courts have played a very crucial role. But going ahead, how do you feel legal judgments are actually shaping the future of India?
Well, I would say that it's not the court's job to actually shape the future of the country, and it's only the job to interpret where there is a vacuum and where there's actually a sort of a gap in the policy or the legislation. So the courts are merely there to correct wrongs, and they cannot adorn the role of parliament in that situation. But with the onset of technology and with the kind of changes that are being ushered in today, the speed at which society is evolving and the speed at which this country especially is moving forward, courts play a huge role in interpreting the policies and the legislations in a way that actually is positive and it's not regressive. Now, to give you an example of a change where the courts have regulated big tech companies like Google and Amazon, it does affect the Indian landscape completely. If you look at the way in which Amazon was trying to enter India and take over the retail space, and was at loggerheads with another big retail group in India, which is the Reliance Retail Group, and the fight for that retail space. Now the entire question would be decided by the courts and no one else, because ultimately no legislation can can intervene in that situation. So I think in all these huge fights, the stakes are very high, and the role of courts is extremely significant. And I feel that every word written by the courts has a huge impact, because it doesn't just affect the parties in the case, it affects all the other parties that are to come to court in future. So that's the value of a precedent by especially the Supreme Court. Even the High Court's precedent matters. So I think, yes, they do play a huge role in the future. But I would caveat that by saying that judges should not get into judicial activism. And it's not a lawyer's job to be an activist. I mean, there's a lot of PI litigants who go to court to try to make a difference in that sense. But that's a different kind of legal practice. And the commercial or constitutional practice is only to look at the case at hand and not to try to change the status quo.
Okay, Nikhil, would you agree with that? That's an interesting perspective there that Avishkar has taken, because we, of course, do see the courts taking suo motu cognizance of several things that the courts and the judges feel are going wrong, and nobody's actually caring about them. So would you agree with what he's saying?
Well, yes and no. Yes, to the extent that in an ideal world, yes, that's what should happen. We have a doctrine of separation of powers. Parliament is supposed to make the laws and the courts are supposed to interpret the laws. But unfortunately, Parliament can also lend itself to populism and doing what is wanted by a majority of people and not necessarily what is right. And therefore, that's where the courts have to be proactive, I think. As I mentioned, in the sphere of environment, that's the most obvious example, where you can't simply leave it to the government, because you have to save something for the next generation as well. In trying to get the votes or please the present generation, you can't throw the environment to the wolves.
Just as we saw with pollution recently in northern India, and the courts actually came in and they very strong, harsh words for all the state governments. Yes,
absolutely.
Go ahead.
Yes, that's right. And as Avishkar mentioned, BS3 to BS6 also so many odd even, for example. The odd even scheme was brought about mainly as a result of nudging by the courts. Shifting of factories outside of Delhi made a huge difference. CNG buses, so many things like that. Most recently, there was a judgment which the common public or the layman may not know, but it has a huge impact. That judgment is called Pankaj Bansal versus Union of India, which says that when you arrest a person, when the Enforcement Directorate arrests a person, they have to provide him the grounds of his arrest. That was not being done. Now the Enforcement Directorate is rightly or wrongly roped in to almost every case, even a simple case of cheating. The Enforcement Directorate is brought in. And what they do is, often they don't tell you why they've arrested you, basically. So the court has said that if we find that that is the case, then we're going to strike down that arrest and we're going to release the person on bail. This creates a really good, a very important safeguard on the powers that be, really.
Right.
Yeah.
Janvi, same question to you. I'd just like to understand, from your perspective, how do you think legal judgments are shaping the future of India, and what role do you think then judges, judiciary, and lawyers need to play? Would you agree with what Avishkar has had to say, that you can't be a lawyer and an activist?
Yeah, so I differ a little bit on this. I also want to take us back to the landmark case of where Mrs. Kapila Hingwarani, she filed a petition in the interest of the public, and this was the first time that a person who was not directly involved in a matter filed a petition. Could
you tell our audience what this case was about?
Okay, so this was the first public interest litigation of our country. There were under trial prisoners in Bihar, and she was really upset reading the newspaper articles about their condition. So she filed a petition with the Honorable Supreme Court. She had no personal stake in the matter, and this had never happened before. So Justice P.N. Bhagwati at that time treated this as a first public interest litigation and released 70 under trial prisoners. And that became a precedent. And since then, it's been decades, and the public interest litigation of our country has evolved. And it has grown, and the umbrella, has sort of grown, and it has included a number of issues. So today, an aggrieved section of society can just directly approach the Honorable Court for, adjudication and for seeking justice. Even someone who is not directly interested and just wants to represent, a section of the population that they feel is suffering, they can directly approach the court, and the court can adjudicate on the issue. So I have a very positive view of this. I feel it really strengthens our democracy, our polity,
Yes.
and helps us seek justice in ways that were not very common earlier. And I feel that is really good for modern India.
Okay, Varun, your perspective on this as well. How do you feel legal judgments are shaping the future of India, and what role do you then see the judges, judiciary, and lawyers such as yourself playing in terms of where India is headed?
See, first of all, we need to understand when you say how have they shaped the future of India. Now, what are we thinking when we say the future of India? Now, today, what we see is that as a society, how do we see our society moving forward with time? Whether the law is evolving with the changes in the society that are happening or not. Is the law guiding our society towards the right path? I think over the years, judicial judgments have shaped our future. Now, it can start with from as far back as probably Keshwanand Bharati. It can go on till which decided that the basic structure doctrine, which decided that the basic structure of the constitution can never be amended, irrespective of whatever amendments the parliament brings in. Maybe something about Indira Sahani judgment, which brought in about 27% reservation everywhere for SC, STs, and then OBCs. I think this, Arnesh Kumar, for that matter, when it decided as to how arrests in this country should be made.
Right.
And abrogation of Article 370, when that happened, then the recent judgment has upheld that. I'm a Kashmiri. I know that, yes, that was a positive move that has happened. So, I feel, yes, judgments have shaped India's future in a lot of ways. But at the same time, coming to the second part of your question, which is what role do judges and lawyers play? I think it has to be, I agree with what Avishkar said, that you cannot be an activist, yes. But at the same time, you cannot lose sight of the fact that there are a lot of people who don't have access to justice. So there has to be, that is why the concept of a PIL or this judicial activism has started. So I feel that it has to be a good balance of both. The needy must be able to, we should be able to approach the court. And if they are not able to, then of course there has to be an effort that has to be made by the lawyer to reach those people in that strata of the society to ensure justice is delivered to them. And at the same time, the courts, we've seen, have taken suo motu action in a lot of cases.
Yes.
So, yes, so that's how it goes. And I feel that, yes, judges, lawyers, all of us, I think it's a good ecosystem we need to establish, which will help the needy. At the same time, we don't overreach our powers.
Okay, Varun, and I'm going to ask the same question to everyone as well, but since you've been the last speaker, I'll start with you. On that note, when we talk about suo motu cognizance taken by the courts, there has now, in a way, there's chatter about a culture where there is an over-dependence on a judiciary, on any matter, and the courts have also, in fact, recently, in the 370 judgment itself, said that you can't bring every matter that a parliament has decided or a state government has decided. You can't knock on the judges' doors each and every time you don't agree with it. How do you think then that balance can be struck better for for better utilization of the court's time?
I mean, if we can't go to court, then where else will we go? I mean, I think we'll have to come to court for whatever the issues are. Yes, of course, every case will have to be decided on its merits. It will have to be decided whether or not this case is worth listening to or not. I think that you can't necessarily say that, no, you cannot come to court because X, Y, Z has happened, or if the parliament is doing this, you can't. You fight. Of course, there are battles you fight in the parliament, There are battles you fight in court. So I think that distinction will have to be made. You cannot, there can't be a fixed stencil for it, and you need to sort of see what are the areas where you need to approach the court and where you can't approach the court. And I think, of course, we rely on the wisdom of the court as well to guide us also when they say that, no, this is not the right way, or this is not the right topic to come before the courts. So I feel there has to be a mix of both. You can't draw, there can't be a hard and fast rule that, no, you can't come to court for this, can't come to court for that. It's completely dependent on facts of each and every case, and I think
okay, fair enough. Janvi, same question to you, please.
Yeah. So, like I said, I feel the right of judicial recourse is very important and is there for everyone, irrespective of the nature of, the dispute in their mind. Or, if they have a grievance and they want to approach the court, that is their right. It should be respected. They should be able to do so. Now, whether that matter should be heard or not heard, or how long a period, till the case is heard, until the judgment is delivered, that is the court's wisdom. That is not for us as lawyers to decide. Our job is to just help an aggrieved party that comes to us put forth their arguments before the honorable judges, and that is where it ends. And the rest is, of course, the judge's wisdom.
Okay, Nikhil, I'd like your perspective on the same as well.
While I agree completely with what my co-panelist said, I'd like to add an important caveat, which is that the real issue, I think, what the court is getting at when it says that don't come to us for everything under the sun, what it means to say is that there needs to be a filtration system in place.
Right.
That out of 1,000 cases that are filed, maybe only 50 are relevant. Now, one side of the coin is to say that, of course, it's up to the court to decide what to entertain and what to not. It can easily dismiss a case on the first day if it finds it to be frivolous. But I think one of the most important issues that need to be addressed in our legal system in general is the issue of costs.
Right.
Now, one of the reasons that you don't have the Supreme Court of, say, of the USA listening to 500 cases a day is the issue of cost. Now, in those countries, real costs are awarded. The actual costs of the litigation which the defendant or the respondent side would have had to pay its lawyers, and penal costs, which penalize you for filing frivolous cases. If that is done, and that is taken seriously, I think that itself would filter out 90% of the cases that are filed.
Okay, Avishka, would you agree with that? Because in a way, then that would also keep a lot of people who may actually have genuine cases from ever approaching the courts.
See, I think access to justice is a very convoluted debate, especially in a country where there's more than 1.67 billion people. Every minute of the Supreme Court spent is very valuable because it's at the cost of the rest of the populations whose cases are not getting heard. So when we talk of access to justice, we can't talk of just saddling the poor and people who really cannot make out a good case by clever lawyering. I mean, there are people with big law firms and fat bills, and then they make out a very good case, and they make it out as if it's a good case, but actually it's a frivolous litigation. Whereas someone who does not have the means may have a good case, but is stopped and is actually, there's a huge barrier for him to approach the courts. And that's the kind of problem we have to address in a country with so much of inequality. And the highest Gini coefficient is actually in India, which shows the level of inequality. In that kind of situation, where now there's a lot of pro bono litigation also. Lawyers have a duty to fight pro bono cases. So I would say any statement made by the court which actually curtails the right of a litigant to approach the court is ultra vires the Constitution itself.
Okay.
Because the right to access justice is a right enshrined in the Constitution. So I think a judicial precedent cannot lay that law down. It will have to be overturned. But I do feel that there has to be, as Nikhil said, that there has to be a way of regulating and modulating the manner in which people approach courts. And I'm a strong believer of limiting the time counsel takes to argue his matter in court, unless the judges want to extend it. And this is, I'm not saying this myself, I've heard a lot of Supreme Court judges say this in court, that, we will want to limit the time for both sides, but it's actually in practice, it's never followed. Because we see that people give in to, the mighty senior counsels on a lot of instances, or they may give in to empathy, or they may feel that there is a situation that demands this case to be heard longer. So it's a much longer debate which will have to be debated, and I think ultimately Parliament will have to come out with a law which regulates this, and not the judiciary. Judiciary can fix its own limitations, but I guess ultimately it's a much larger debate.
Okay, talking about right to access to judiciary, but also I want to, Varun, talk about the right to practice. And what I mean from that is that I'm friends with a lot of young lawyers myself, and I see a lot of them who are working in different states of India, all now trying to move to New Delhi because the Supreme Court of India only sits in the national capital. And that's a problem that a lot of journalists also face, right? You have the parliament that's only here. So you want access to all of the highest institutions of the nation. Do you think, and this has been a debate for a very long time, but I like your perspective as a young lawyer, do you think that there's a possibility in a future India to have perhaps benches of the Supreme Court in several different states? What is your perspective on that? And what could be the possible pros and cons?
You must have seen a slight smile on my face when you asked me that question.
Yes.
So let me just tell you, I belong to the state of Madhya Pradesh, and I probably, after I did my law, I went out, I did my master's from London, I came back, I was practicing in Delhi, and then for the last 5-6 years, I'm actually practicing in Madhya Pradesh. I've gone back, although I have an office here as well, but I consciously made an effort to go back to Jabalpur, where my hometown is, and to practice there where the bench of the High Court is. Yes, that's one part of it, where the first part of your question was where people are trying to flock to Delhi to get access to
simply
Supreme
to
Court.
access the Supreme Court.
Yeah. So I think a solution to that is, which I think our current Chief Justice has done pretty well, is the VC mode of is the VC mode of hearing. So now what that has done is it has actually given access to Supreme Court everywhere, from anywhere, from any part of the country.
Right.
So you really, per se, in my opinion, don't need another bench of the Supreme Court right now. And if I feel that if the current VC mode is actually pretty good, in fact, if it's made even better with time, I'm sure with technology and advancements, of course, it will become better. Once it does, I don't feel that there will be a need for another Supreme Court bench. Maybe if the pendency goes up so high and maybe we need a bench for some other reason. Yes. But just for access to the Supreme Court, I don't think so. We need it. And I also tell, as an advice I give to all the young lawyers, I always tell them, whenever you've done law, finished law, go back to your city, go back to your state, practice law there. That is where you'll actually have the learning. You'll actually get clients over there, because that's where your hometown is. That is where your stronghold is. You come to Delhi thinking that, okay, the Supreme Court is here, the various tribunals are here, the Delhi High Court is here. So, you come thinking, okay, I want to be a Supreme Court lawyer. But no, let me tell you, going back to your state, practicing in the various high courts, or even the district courts for that matter,
yes,
I think should be the way forward for all young lawyers. And that's what I always advise them also.
Okay, Janvi, your perspective as well.
Yeah, no, I agree with what Varun said, but I also want to add that, his point about virtual courts and virtual access. So in the pandemic, we started a platform called the Virtual Lawyer, where we had online sessions, which were free for everyone across social media platforms, where we had the top minds of the country giving, sessions on different aspects of law for everyone. Now, what we saw in that was that there were a number of lawyers, law students from the remotest corners of the country who were in those sessions just to gain access to that knowledge, to those people, to, because it's impossible for them to travel so far and repeatedly and, meet such people or even just talk to them casually, right? Let alone be in court and observe them for months at a stretch. So that way the access increased. It became easier. That we did it pro bono, so we didn't charge for it. So it was possible for everyone to sort of, be involved in the process and sitting in their houses, right? So that, yes, I feel is something that we should look into, that we should work on. But exactly how that happens through the court system is something that we have to see in the future.
Okay, Nikhil, your perspective as well, and I'd just like you to also then shed some light on, as Varun pointed out, that there is already a pendency of cases in India. We don't have enough judges to take care of the number of people we have and the number of cases that are being filed. While you've already addressed that, saying that there has to be a filtration system in terms of what matter actually ends up reaching the highest court, but at the end of the day, we're the largest population in the world, so there will be cases on a daily basis. If you can address it from that perspective as well, in order to reduce the pendency, is that something that the Supreme Court can perhaps look at?
Devika, if you're referring to the Supreme Court having benches around the country as a way to reduce the pendency, I'm not sure that that would really matter. I mean, what's the difference between that and just adding more judges to the existing Supreme Court? As
Right.
Varun said, I think the recent virtual hearing system addresses a large part of these problems. Now, I've been an advocate of the virtual hearing system from the beginning. But of course, you can't lose sight of the fact that there are people from all parts of the country, many of them who don't have access to good internet connectivity. That's a huge problem. So to address that, for example, the Delhi High Court and some of the district courts in Delhi have set up centers where even an outsider can come and just conduct his virtual hearing and go back. If a lawyer doesn't have a good internet connection in his office, or if he doesn't have an office at all, he can always go and visit that virtual hearing center physically and then
Right.
do it virtually from his nearest district court or high court. So I
Okay.
think that's a good via media to provide internet access to all these people who can then address the Supreme Court from wherever they are.
Okay, Avishkar, your perspective also, and since Nikhil spoke about internet access, that's another major part. Like I said, it's a lot of stakeholders of India that have to then play that role in giving access to the internet, because a lot of times, even when I'm hearing legal proceedings online, there are still people who are not being able to figure out the technology. So of course, the tech education part of it for everyone and access to that is a major aspect that needs to be looked into as well.
Well, access is definitely, it's widened because of the fact that you can use virtual hearings, but whether it's as effective is one question to be asked. And the second thing to be asked when you're talking about having different regional branches of the Supreme Court is whether there, even within the current Supreme Court, we lack consistency between the judgments. So if you have regional branches, there,
Okay.
there's hardly will be ever, the judgments would ever be able to be reconciled with each other. So I feel that there's a lot to be debated before we jump on such attractive ideas, before we try to implement them. But I think at the moment, VC hearings should be used, but only when it disables a person from appearing in court physically. Only in that scenario, a VC hearing must be promoted. Otherwise, I think physical hearings are the best form of hearings, and I think they're the most effective in conveying the message from the bar to the bench.
Okay, I'm going to end here, but I'm just, 30 seconds on one last, slightly lighter question. Varun, what do you feel are some of the challenges before young lawyers today, and how is it that we can address that?
I think one of the major challenges that a young lawyer faces when he joins litigation is the money. I think is what you earn. I think that's probably one of the major challenges where people feel, and that's why you see a lot of bright young students and from national law schools and good colleges not joining litigation. They take up corporate jobs, they take up otherwise law firms, and they don't wish to enter litigation. I think that's one of the major drawbacks as to that the pay, because the pay is very less when you start. And my advice would be that if law is your passion, then just go with it. And I think because once you do that, there is absolutely no cap, no bar. Once you are good in litigation, I mean, then the sky is the limit. So I feel, yes, you have to be patient. You have to give it some time. But that is, I feel, one of the major obstacles is the pay. I would.
All right, Janvi, your quick perspective.
Yeah, so everything he said, and also I want to add that being a woman in litigation has its own challenges. I mean, although we have come a long way, we still have a lot of gender bias that we have to overcome. We, for like speaking from a young woman's perspective, when I enter court till I reach the place where I have to stand and argue, there is a sea of men I have to cross, so, and they're all seniors, and so it's still very overwhelming for us. And also we see that there aren't many women around, and even if they join, like he said, there is some amount of saturation, frustration, and they leave litigation. So yes, and women lawyers, even though we have twice as many challenges, please stick in litigation. Please please, go through it. Go through it.
Absolutely. And of course, India is changing, and hopefully this aspect will change as well. Nikhil, your quick perspective.
So adding to what Janvi was saying, I think the facilities for women lawyers should be made much better. There should be a creche. A creche would be very, very important for women with young children, so that they can leave their kids in a safe space at their workplace, as you expect from many corporate offices. The other thing is economics. Simply, there's too much demand. There's too much supply and not enough demand. So if you're a young lawyer coming from outside Delhi and wanting to practice in Delhi, then as Varun was saying, my advice would be to build up some sort of a client base in your own city first. Become more economically independent, and then think about shifting here.
Okay.
Yeah.
Avishkar, I leave the last word with you.
I would say that there's a lot of challenges for every young lawyer faces. On the family front, your health and fitness, there's no work-life balance. You may not be able to commit to your social commitments. There's a lot of sacrifices, but the one sacrifice I feel that is most prevalent in the Supreme Court and in Delhi is that they only pay heed to seniority and experience. So I think that is something which needs to change, because that's current Chief Justice really welcomes younger lawyers arguing cases themselves. I mean, we've all spent over a decade in the profession, but I think I'm talking about people in 1 or 2 years, they won't even be heard by a bench of the Supreme Court. So I think that sort of taboo needs to go, and there has to be a lot of change in terms of, appreciating meritocracy, and rather than just, going by seniority. So I think that will be a welcome change.
Okay, I'm completely run out of time, but I thank you all for taking out all of your times from your busy schedules today. A lot of people here have run from court to make it here for this session, so really appreciate that. And thank you so much once again for joining us at the Law and Constitution Dialogue. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
For more such videos, subscribe to the NewsX YouTube channel, hit the bell icon.